At 11:30 on the night of the Bexley dinner, in the still-room passage with a single candle, Verity Aldwyn signed her name to a document refusing the Duke of Bexley an extension of his lease. She signed it V. Aldwyn, which was her own name and had not been spoken aloud in 3 years, and she blotted it and folded it into the letter for Mr. Otley in Chancery Lane, and put the letter inside her stays where nothing in that house would find it. Then she went up the back stairs, tied on a clean apron, and carried the claret into the dining room, where the man whose lease she had just refused was saying, to the general amusement of 11 guests, that a house is only as good as the people you never have to look at in it. "Thank you, Anne," said the Duke of Bexley, without looking at her. He had been saying "Thank you, Anne" for 3 years. He had never once in 3 years looked up while he said it. She filled his glass and moved on down the table, and nobody at it could have told you the colour of her eyes. She had come to Ashcote in the spring of 1814 to look at a man, and had stayed for something else entirely, and the difference between those two facts was the whole of the last 3 years. Her father had arranged the match when she was 19, a duke's second son then, with no prospect of the title and a great deal of charm, and Verity Aldwyn with £11,000 and her mother's Ashcote estate held in trust, and her own name on the rent roll of half a parish. It had been a good match on paper, and her father had died 2 months before the contracts were drawn, and the thing had gone into abeyance the way things do, and then Adam Thornycroft's elder brother had drowned at Weymouth, and Adam Thornycroft had become the 9th Duke of Bexley, and had taken a lease on a country house in Hertfordshire while his own seat was rebuilt. The house was Ashcote. He did not know it was hers. There was no reason he should have. The lease was signed by the Ashcote Trust, and the Ashcote Trust was Mr. Otley of Chancery Lane, and Mr. Otley of Chancery Lane was a small dry man who had loved her mother and would have gone into the sea for her daughter. Verity had asked Otley one question in the January of 1814, whether it might be arranged for her to see the Duke of Bexley without the Duke of Bexley seeing her. She had expected a fortnight. She had expected to observe a man across 2 dinners, form a judgment, and instruct Otley to write the refusal her father was no longer alive to argue with. She had not expected the second housemaid. The second housemaid's name was Alice Reddish, and she was 17 years old, and in the 4th week of Verity's disguise she was turned out of Ashcote without a character. It happened in a passage. That was the thing Verity would carry for 3 years, that it took perhaps 40 seconds, and that she was standing 8 feet away with an armful of linen, and that she did nothing, because she had been a servant for 4 weeks, and had not yet learnt what she was permitted to do, and had been too frightened of her own exposure to find out. Mrs. Peveril, the housekeeper, said that a silver knife rest was missing from the small dining room. Alice Reddish said she had not taken it. Mrs. Peveril said the girl had been seen in that room out of hours. Alice Reddish said she had been sent to that room by Mrs. Peveril at 6 that morning. And then the Duke of Bexley came through the passage on his way out to the stables with his gloves in his hand, and Mrs. Peveril said, "Your Grace, I am sorry you should see it. A theft. I would not trouble you with it," and Adam Thornycroft, who was 2 months into a dukedom he had never been raised to, and was late for a horse, said, "Then do not trouble me with it. You know your business, Mrs. Peveril. Deal with it as you think best." 9 words. He was through the door before the last of them landed. He never learnt the girl's name. He never learnt what she was accused of taking, or whether she had taken it, or where in England she went afterward, and if you had asked him about it 4 days later, he would have looked at you with perfect blankness, because in his life it had not been an event at all. That was the moment Verity Aldwyn stopped observing a possible husband and began observing a house. She stayed because she had discovered something at Ashcote considerably more interesting than a duke's dinner manners. The house was being robbed. Not dramatically, there was nothing so vulgar as a missing knife rest. Mrs. Peveril had run Ashcote for 19 years under 3 tenants, and she had built, over those 19 years, an arrangement of small tolls so ordinary and so well established that 4 different sets of household accounts had passed under 4 different men of business without a single question. Every tradesman in the parish paid her a commission. Every place in that house had a price: £3 for a housemaid, 5 for a footman, and the money never appeared anywhere because it was never written down. And the coal was short, and the candles were short, and the servants' beer was watered, and twice a year a girl who asked a question was turned out without a character on some little accusation nobody troubled to examine, which was how 19 years of it had stayed quiet. Verity Aldwyn, who owned the house, could have ended it in a morning with a letter. She did not write the letter. She wrote a different one to Otley, saying that she would stay through the summer, and that he was to send her £40 by a route that could not be traced, and that he was to begin, very quietly, looking for a girl named Alice Reddish. It took Otley 2 years and 4 months to find her. Verity did not spend those years waiting. She learnt the house instead, from the inside, the way no landlord in England ever learns a house: which chimney smoked, which floor was rotten under the 3rd floor matting, which tradesman shorted the flour, and which one did not. And exactly how much of the £400 a year that the Duke of Bexley paid in rent came back out of the servants' hall in coin that never touched a ledger. She kept a book. She kept it in the same place as the letters, which is to say on her person, and it was small and cheap and written in a hand that was not her own, and by the 3rd year it was the most valuable document in Hertfordshire. And she waited on the Duke of Bexley at table 111 times. She would say afterward that she had not been looking for reasons to despise him, and that this was what made the 3 years so difficult, because he did not supply them. He was not a cruel man. He was pleasant to his guests, generous to his tenants in the abstract, and troubled about the poor of the parish in the way of a man who gives £20 at Christmas and does not go to look. He was simply not there. That was the whole of it. He moved through a house that ran on the labour of 19 people, and he did not see one of them. And if you had told him so, he would have been genuinely wounded and would have said, quite honestly, that he had never in his life spoken a harsh word to a servant. Which was true. He never had. It was the carelessness that did the work. It was always going to be the carelessness. Otley found Alice Reddish in a lodging-house in Southwark in the November of 1816. She was 20 years old. She had gone from Ashcote with no character and no wages owing, and had got 3 weeks' work in St Albans and lost it when they wrote to Mrs Peveril, and had gone to London and had done the things a girl does in London when no household in England will have her and she cannot go home, because her mother is dead and her stepfather will not. She was alive. Otley's letter was very careful about it. She was alive, and she was in service again, under a different name, in a house in Lambeth that paid £8 a year and asked no questions, and she had a scar on her forearm from a winter Verity did not ask about. Verity Aldwyn read that letter in a still room at midnight, and then went out into the kitchen garden in her apron, and was sick into the cabbages. She wrote to Otley the same night. She instructed him to settle £60 a year on Alice Reddish for life, immediately, without conditions, from the Ashcote rents, and to tell her nothing whatever about where it came from until Verity could tell her herself. and she instructed him to refuse the Duke of Bexley's lease renewal, which fell due in the March, and to give no reason at all. That was the letter in her stays on the night of the dinner. That was the signature, and the blotting, and the walk up the back stairs with the claret. She had decided, in a kitchen garden in November, that she was going to end it. What she had not decided was how, and it was the how that undid her, because the how required her to look at what she had actually been doing for 3 years. She could ruin him. That was the plain fact of it, and she turned it over for a fortnight. Refused the lease in March, put the whole household establishment out at 6 weeks' notice, and let the county work out for itself why the Ashcote Trust would not have the Duke of Bexley at any price. It would follow him. There were only so many great houses to let in England, and only so many landlords, and a duke whose lease had been refused without a reason given was a duke about whom something was assumed. She could do it in one letter. She had, in point of fact, already written it. And she found, sitting on the edge of a servant's bed in the room she had slept in for 3 years, that the sentence she could not get past was this, that if she ruined Adam Thornycroft in March, Mrs. Peveril would leave Ashcote with 19 years of takings, an excellent character in her own handwriting, and a new place by Michaelmas. The Duke had said 9 careless words in a passage. The housekeeper had said the other 700, and had turned out 4 girls that Verity now had names for, and had been paid for every one of them. I have spent 3 years, Verity thought, preparing to punish the man whose crime was that he did not look, and I have spent them standing next to the woman who counted on it. She went to him on the 4th of December, at 11 at night, in her own clothes, not her apron, her own clothes, which had been in a locked box in the box-room for 3 years, and did not fit as well as they had, and her mother's garnets, and her hair done the way a woman of 26 with £11,000 does her hair. She came down the front stairs, which she had never once used, and she stood in the door of the library and waited for him to look up. He looked up. There is no describing what went across Adam Thornycroft's face in the 4 seconds after that, and Verity, who had been rehearsing this for a fortnight, found she had not prepared for any part of it. "I know you," he said slowly. "I know you're—" and then he stopped, and stood up, and the colour went out of him entirely. "You bring the claret." "I have brought the claret 111 times, Your Grace." "Who are you?" "My name is Verity Aldwyn." She came into the room. "I am the sole beneficiary of the Ashcote Trust. I own this house, and the home farm, and the 11 cottages on the Wimborne Road, and the pew you sit in on Sundays. My father contracted me to you in 1810, when you were a younger son and I was 19, and he died before it was signed, and I came here in the spring of 1814 to look at you before I refused you." The clock on the chimney-piece worked its way through a good deal of time. 3 years, said the Duke of Bexley. 3 years. You have been carrying my wine for 3 years to make up your mind about me. No, said Verity, that took 4 weeks. I stayed for something else, and it is that something else I have come down to tell you about, and I would ask you to sit down, Your Grace, because it is going to take a while, and you are not going to enjoy any of it. She told him about the coal first, because the coal was arithmetic, and arithmetic is easier to hear. She put her little book on the table between them and took him through it. 19 years, £3 a place. The tradesmen's commissions, and the short wait, and the fact that he had paid for 11 tons of coal last winter and burned 7. She gave him the names of 4 tradesmen who would swear to it if a landlord asked, and would swear to nothing at all if a tenant did, and she explained, patiently, why that was. Because the tenant leaves in 3 years, and the housekeeper stays for 19. He was very quiet through the whole of it. "How much?" he said at last. "Between £400 and £600 over 19 years, and I want to be honest with you that the figure is the least important thing in this book." She turned the page. "This is the part I came down for." And she read him 4 names. Alice Reddish, 17, turned out without a character in April of 1814 over a silver knife rest that was in the butler's pantry the whole time. Jane Coote, 15, turned out in 1811. 2 more, 1806 and 1809, whom she had names for and nothing else. "I do not know what became of the 2, Verity said. "I know what became of Alice Reddish because I have spent 2 years and 4 months paying a solicitor to find her, and I am not going to give you the particulars, because they are hers and not mine to hand out. I will tell you only that she is alive, that she is in Lambeth, that she has a scar on her arm, and that she is 20 years old." Adam Thornycroft sat with his hands on his knees. "I do not remember her," he said. "No, I want to say something, and I want you to understand I am not offering it as a defence." His voice was not steady. "I have gone through it 4 times since you began speaking, and I cannot find the passage, or the day, or the girl. There is nothing there. It is not that I have forgotten it. It never went in." "I know," said Verity. "I was standing 8 feet away with an armful of sheets, and I watched it not go in, and I have thought about that for 3 years." She closed the book. "You said 9 words. You said, 'Do not trouble me with it. You know your business. Deal with it as you think best.' And then you went out to the stables, and a girl of 17 went to London. And both of those things happened in the same 40 seconds, and only one of you knew it had been a morning at all." He did not defend himself. That was the first thing that surprised her, and it went on surprising her for 4 days, because she had built a great many arguments, and he did not make a single one of them. He did not say she should have come to him sooner. He did not say she had been deceiving him for 3 years. He did not say, and she had been most certain of this one, that a woman who could have stopped it in April of 1814 with 1 letter to her own solicitor and did not, was in no position to read him a list of names. He might have said it was true, and she knew it was true, and she had said it to herself in a kitchen garden in November with her hands in the cabbages. What he said on the 2nd morning was, "Will you take me to Lambeth?" "No, Miss Aldwyn, no, and I will tell you exactly why, because you will otherwise think it is cruelty, and it is not." Verity set down the letter she was writing. "You want to go and stand in front of that young woman and be sorry. I understand it. I have wanted it myself, and I have not gone either. But she is 20, and she is in a place that asks no questions, and a duke arriving at that door does not make her life better, Your Grace. It makes her the girl a duke came to see. Everybody in that house will know by supper, and not one of them will get the story right. Then what am I to do? You are to ask her." Verity slid a sheet of paper across. "Otley will carry a letter. She may say yes, and she may say no, and she may say nothing at all for a year, and whichever it is, you will accept it in 1 letter and not write a second time. That is the whole of what is available to you, and I am sorry it is so small. But it is small because you made it small in April of 1814, and it does not get to be large now because you have finally noticed. Mrs. Peveril found out on the 6th of December because Ashcote was a house in which Mrs. Peveril found out everything, and she moved faster than either of them expected. She did not deny the accounts. She was far too good for that. She went to the county. By the 11th of December, there was not a drawing-room within 15 miles that had not heard, in strictest confidence, that the Duke of Bexley had been keeping a woman at Ashcote for 3 years under a servant's name, that she had been seen coming down the front stairs at 11 o'clock at night in Garnet's, that the housekeeper of 19 years' standing had been dismissed for objecting to it, and that the poor woman had been threatened with a charge of theft to keep her quiet. It was extremely good. Every fact in it was true, and every one of them was in the wrong order. And it very nearly worked, because there is no answer to it. A woman cannot stand up in a Hertfordshire drawing-room and say I lived in his house for 3 years and nothing improper occurred, since that is precisely what a woman would say. The county had a version that explained everything and required no evidence, and by the 14th of December 2 families had cut Verity Aldwyn in the street, and Adam Thornycroft's own aunt had written to him from Bath. He came to her at Otley's chambers in London on the 16th, having ridden it in a day, and he was in a considerable state. I will marry you, he said, tomorrow, by licence, and it ends. It is the only thing that ends it. I know how it looks, and I know what you will think I am doing. Sit down. Verity, sit down, Adam, and think for 1 minute about what you have just offered me. She was, he saw, entirely white and entirely calm. You have offered to marry a woman 4 days after you learnt she has any name at all, in order to stop the county saying a thing about her. That is not a proposal, that is a repair. And in 11 years, when we have quarrelled about something quite else, you will not be able to keep from thinking that you did it, and I will not be able to keep from knowing it, and I would rather be cut in the street by every family in Hertfordshire until I am 60. Then what? Then we do what I should have done in April of 1814, said Verity Aldwyn, instead of being clever for 3 years. We stop managing it, and we put it in front of people who can look. She summoned the quarter sessions, which no one had expected, least of all Mrs. Peveril. It was not a criminal prosecution. Verity had learnt enough law from Otley to know she would never make a theft charge stand against 19 years of unwritten commissions, and she said so plainly in her first sentence, which took the wind out of the room before it had properly filled. What she brought instead was an application, as landlord, for the examination of the Ashcote household accounts, with the 4 tradesmen subpoenaed. It was the dullest possible proceeding, and she had chosen it for exactly that reason. Nobody can make a scandal out of a coal bill. She stood up in the assembly rooms at Hertford on the 9th of January in her own clothes and her mother's garnets and said, My name is Verity Aldwyn. I own Ashcote. I have lived in it for 3 years as a housemaid under the name Anne Marsh, and I did it without the knowledge of my tenant, and there is not one word of what the county has been told about that arrangement which is true. But I am not going to spend this morning on it, because the county will believe what it likes about a woman, and I have got 4 other names to read out, and only so much of anybody's attention. I went to Ashcote in April of 1814 to look at a man my father wished me to marry. Within a month I found something I had not gone looking for, and I stayed, and I have a book here that I kept for 3 years. These are the accounts. 11 tons of coal paid for, and 7 delivered. £3 for a housemaid's place, 5 for a footman's, paid to Mrs. Peveril in coin by 19 people in this county. 4 of whom are sitting in this room, and 2 of whom will speak this morning, and these are the names of 4 young women turned out of that house without a character between 1806 and 1814, on accusations that were never examined by anybody, because a girl who asks where the coal goes is a girl who is shortly afterward found to have stolen something. Alice Reddish, Jane Coote, Sarah Wickham, Ellen Doe, of whom I have not been able to discover the Christian name, which I would ask this bench to notice, because it is the whole of my point. I am not asking anybody to punish Mrs. Peveril for the coal. I am asking that the accounts be examined on the record, because once they are examined she cannot ever again write herself a character in her own hand, and that is worth a great deal more to the next 17-year-old in that passage than any sentence this bench could pass. She sat down. Mrs. Peveril's counsel was good and had a great deal to say about a woman who had lived 3 years in a house under a false name, and he said all of it, and it landed rather well for some minutes. And then Adam Thornycroft, Duke of Bexley, stood up at the back of the assembly rooms at Hertford and asked leave to speak. "I am the tenant," he said. "I am the man in the story the county has been telling, and I am not going to say anything about that story, except that it is false, and that I would say so under oath if the bench wishes to swear me. I want to say something else. On a morning in April of 1814, I came through a passage in that house, late for a horse, and my housekeeper told me there had been a theft. I did not ask what was taken. I did not ask who was accused. I said, 'Deal with it as you think best,' and I went out to the stables, and a girl of 17 was turned out of my house without a character and without her wages, and I did not know her name until 4 weeks ago. Miss Aldwyn has been called a great many things in this county for a month. She has not been called the one thing that is actually true, so I will say it. She has spent 3 years and a considerable amount of her own money finding a housemaid I could not have described to you an hour after she was gone. I paid the rent on that house. Everything that was done in it was done in my name. That is what a name is for, and I did not use mine, and I would ask the bench to examine those accounts. The accounts were examined. It took a clerk 9 days. Mrs. Peveril was not charged with anything, which Verity had said from the beginning, and which nobody believed until it happened. But the examination went on the record at Hertford, and a housekeeper of 19 years' standing left the county in March with no character that any house would apply for, and went to a sister in Norwich, and did not enter service again. Alice Reddish answered Otley's letter in the February. She said, in a hand that had been taught to somebody who left school at 11, that she would take the £60 because she was not a fool, and that she did not wish to see the Duke of Bexley, and that she did not wish to see Miss Aldwyn either, and that Miss Aldwyn might have thought of that in April of 1814 when she was standing 8 feet away with the sheets. Verity read it 4 times and then wrote back 1 letter, as she had told Adam to do, and did not write again. She kept the reply for the rest of her life. He asked her in the September at Ashcote, which was hers, and which he was no longer renting. He had taken a house in the next county in the March, because Verity had refused the renewal in December, and had declined, quite firmly, to unrefuse it. He had not argued. He had ridden over twice a week for 6 months instead, and had been, by the count of her own housekeeper, a new one, engaged by Verity herself at £40 and no commissions, the most consistently punctual caller in Hertfordshire. "I have had 9 months," he said. "I want that on the record, because you told me in December that 4 days was a repair, and I have thought about that sentence more than any other sentence anybody has ever said to me. And it is not 4 days now, and it is not to stop anybody saying anything, because they have stopped mostly, and the ones who have not are going to go on whatever we do." He turned his hat over. "I would like to say the reason plainly, and then I will not press you again this year. In April of 1814, I walked through a passage and did not look, and a woman 8 feet away spent 3 years of her life on what I did not look at. I have not been able to get past it, and I am not trying to. I do not want to marry you because you were wronged. I want to marry you because you were the only person in that house who counted. Verity Aldwyn was quiet a moment. "You have left something out," she said. "You have left out that I could have stopped it in April with one letter and did not, and that I was clever for 3 years when I could have been useful in an afternoon, and that Alice Reddish will not see me either." Her voice did not quite hold. "If you are going to have me, Adam, you are going to have that as well, and you do not get to tell me it was not my fault. It was partly my fault. I have made my peace with owning it, and I will not have it argued away." "I was not going to argue it away," he said. "I was going to say that there are 2 people in England who know exactly what it costs to have been in that passage, and that I would rather spend my life with the other one than with anybody who has never had to think about it at all." She said yes. "There is a book in the muniment room at Ashcote, small and cheap, written in a hand that is not quite the Duchess of Bexley's. It is kept with the estate papers rather than the family ones, which was her instruction, and beside it in the same box is a single letter from Lambeth in a poor hand, and a note in her own writing that says only, 'Read this before engaging anybody.' Her successors have read it. That was the point of it. The Ashcote establishment has been engaged by the mistress of the house, in person, at named wages, with the wages written down, since the spring of 1817, and every servant who leaves that house leaves with a character written in the Duchess's own hand, whatever the manner of their going, which the county thought eccentric for about 4 years, and then stopped noticing. 2 of the 4 were found in the end. Jane Coote was in Bristol and married and wanted nothing, and said so kindly. Sarah Wickham was dead in 1813 of a thing that people died of in London when they had nowhere to go. Alice Reddish never answered again and drew her £60 a year for 41 years and is buried at Lambeth under her own name. "You still write to Otley about her every quarter," Adam said one evening. The second spring, finding his wife at the desk. "I write to Otley to confirm the annuity has been paid. It is a different thing." Verity sanded the letter. She does not want a correspondent. She wants £60 and to be left alone, and she is entitled to both, and the only thing I am owed in the whole of this business is nothing at all. He put his hand on the back of her chair. "Thank you, Anne," he said. She looked up. It was the first time he had used it since the December, and she saw that he had been carrying it about for 2 years, waiting for a moment when it would land the right way. "That is not funny." "No," he agreed. "It is not meant to be. I said it 111 times to a woman I could not have picked out of a room, and I have decided I am going to go on saying it now and then for as long as we both live, on the days when I find I have begun to be comfortable." He straightened up. "You may consider it a housekeeping expense." Verity Aldwyn, Duchess of Bexley, who had poured a man's wine for 3 seasons and had signed the lease on the roof over his head, put down her pen and laughed until she had to hold the edge of the desk.